In this video, I'm going to suggest a few different starters for your argument essay. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like, and for more tutorial videos like this one, visit my blog at IELTS.com. For feedback on your writing or speaking, join us at the community at IELTSnetwork.com. So in this video, we are going to look at a typical argument essay structure and go through each of the different areas of the structure, and I'm going to suggest little ways that you can start the different sentences in these different paragraphs. So as you know, your argument essay will typically have 4 paragraphs. You're going to have some kind of introduction paragraph, 2 supporting paragraphs, and finally a conclusion. Now in the introduction, you need to progress through 4 different stages. The first being to give some sort of background, and you do that in the background sentence, and then you narrow it further with the detailed background sentence, and this leads you into your position or a declaration of purpose for the essay, and that occurs in the 3rd sentence, and finally you're going to share an outline for the way that the essay is going to progress. So it's sort of just a declaration of the ideas that you're going to use to support your position. So in the opening sentence, you want to be a bit broad. You're trying to entice the reader, you're trying to interest them, and you might start the sentence with something like, in many parts of the world, or perhaps it is common today. And please note the commas. I'm conscious of including these or not including them. Okay, so that if you see it as common today, that would not be followed by a comma. Maybe many people today feel. Okay, so just sort of an opening statement that's quite broad and introduces the topic of the essay to the reader. Now the detailed background sentence should flow naturally from the background sentence, and it should work to sort of narrow the topic further so that the reader really does know specifically what you're going to be talking about in the essay. So these sentences typically have the word "this" in them somewhere, not always, but I mean it's a very easy way to connect it to the sentence prior. So this is nowhere more evident than, okay, or this can be seen, or there are many reasons for this, and progress further. And of course I should point out that that these stock phrases, they won't work for every single essay. You're going to have to tailor them a little bit depending on the topic that you get. So it's just good to be aware of different ways that you can start your sentences. Now in the 3rd sentence, you're going to be declaring your purpose for the essay, or otherwise known as your thesis. So you could word it as, in my opinion, comma. Okay, so it's like you've already brought up the topic in your background sentences, and now you're kind of focusing it specifically on where you stand. I argue. You could write it that way. If it's an agree or disagree sort of question, you could say I agree or I disagree. I agree that, and then progress from there. Okay, and then the final sentence in the introduction is your outline sentence, and again, you want this to flow quite naturally from the thesis. In some of my example essays, I actually connect the 2 sentences together, the thesis and the outline sentence, so that might be an option for you as well. But you might start with, this will be proven by analyzing, or this essay will support this by looking at, and then maybe state the 2 areas that are going to come up in your supporting paragraphs. this essay will provide evidence in support of this position. So, and these sorts of openers are very good at helping to link the different parts of your essay together. So because you're kind of declaring the positions that you're going to look at in the supporting paragraphs, it's a very clear link, and of course that will win you marks for cohesion. Okay, now let's look to the first supporting paragraph. So as you know, you're also progressing through 4 different stages. You're going to declare what the paragraph is talking about in the topic sentence. You'll share some sort of tangible example to act as evidence of the claim that you're making in the topic. The discussion sentence is very important because it sort of shows the logical conclusion that you're progressing towards, or what can logically be deduced from the example. Okay, so how exactly does the example support the topic or prove the topic sentence to be true? And then the concluding sentence links the entire paragraph right back up to the argument that you made in the introduction paragraph. It basically links this back to your thesis. So the topic sentence would be worded something like, firstly, of course, or even firstly, it must be recognized that, and then you'd progress to whatever your idea is. Now there are several different ways to bring up an example. Of course, you could just write for example or for instance. Okay, for example or for instance. Don't write a slash on your essay, of course, but for example, for instance, comma, and then carry on. Or something like take, and then share the example, and then comma for example, or whatever. So take if the example is Microsoft, take Microsoft for example, and then you would carry on in a second sentence to more explain the example. Okay, so it kind of makes the example sentence 2 sentences really, in effect. Something like this is evidenced by and then share your example. Or whatever it is, play is a good example here. And then much like take blank, for example, so this, you're expanding the example into 2 sentences. So if you were to say something like Microsoft plays a good example here, at Microsoft, blah, 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 whatever the example is, and then carry on to the discussion sentence after that. Okay, now let me just put this onto one page so that we can see it clearly. So the discussion sentence has the very important role of linking the example to the topic, showing how the example proves that what's claimed in the topic is true. So we would say something like, this example clearly shows, and then whatever logical conclusion we're leading to, or this example makes it clear that, and then carry on, or when looking at this example, it is clear, it is obvious that, and then whatever the logical conclusion is. Or even something as simple as clearly, and then you're sharing kind of the conclusion that you're leading to, or the logical progression that you want the reader to experience or to notice. So the concluding sentence, as I was mentioning, links the entire idea that was presented in this paragraph right back up to the central theme or the central position of the essay. So we might finish with something like, thus, it must be concluded that, Okay, so you're kind of saying like, well, it's obvious from this, that, and then you sort of rephrase your thesis in a way, okay, so that when the examiner gets to this sentence, they see that, oh, okay, well, this paragraph obviously works towards supporting the thesis, and if the thesis is written correctly, it links right to the essay question. So it all kind of works as one big cohesive unit. Or we might say something like, the link between such and such is thus clear, or is thus clear, or you could say is obvious. So when you move on to supporting paragraph 2, which is what that should have said, so you obviously are going to carry out several of the same steps. So you're going to present another example, you're going to discuss that and come to some sort of reasoned conclusion. So for the topic sentence, it sort of depends on what your purpose is. I mean, if you're kind of carrying on with the same sort of momentum, if you're sharing an additional point that supports your thesis, then you might start with something like further, comma, and then carry on like that. Or in addition to this, comma, or comma, and carry on. Now, there might be certain instances when you are going to offer some concession, or you're kind of providing some perspective by looking at an alternative point of view. So in these cases, you might use however. This is not the case for, and then whatever, carry on. Or on the other hand, although this may be true, and then carry on. Now, the one thing to be careful about is, as you know, in an argument essay, you don't want to start countering yourself, really, because the point of it is that you're trying to argue a position. So offering a bit of concession, maybe sticking in a third supporting paragraph that, maybe offers a bit of concession in this way is fine, just so long as the overall message is clear and that your position on the topic is preserved, no matter what you write in the essay. Okay, because the argument essay is supposed to fundamentally argue a position. And then so you would carry on with the example, discussion, sentence, and concluding sentence, as we've talked about before. Then you come to the conclusion paragraph. And this paragraph is, of course, supposed to wrap up everything that you've said. It's supposed to re-declare your position, and that should obviously match whatever you said at the beginning of the essay. So the first sentence is a summarizing sentence, and you could start this by saying something like, after analyzing the above, it can be concluded that, and now the summarizing sentence and the declaration of position, or the restatement of position, these sentences can be connected. So, as you see, even in this example lead-in here, so after analyzing the above, it can be concluded that, of course, after this, you're going to go right into what your position is in the essay, and so that would also fulfill the second part here, declaration of position. So that could be one way to start the sentence. A second way could be, as the above shows, comma, or following the above examination. Okay. And then declaration of position. So this is sort of a restatement of what you said in the beginning of the essay. So it is for these reasons I feel. And finally, you share a hope or a recommendation. This is kind of a nice way to close the essay. Sometimes it's difficult to think of creative ways to kind of sign off on the essay. But if you just think of some sort of hope that you want, or some sort of recommendation that you can make, this should fulfill any sense of closure that you need. So you might say something like, I hope that, or it is my hope that, or if you were going to do a recommendation, you might say, I feel this should, okay, and then you could finish it that way. So I feel, and then if the topic is, say, government funding of a certain kind of education, so I feel governments everywhere should, and then whatever. So I hope those suggestions are helpful. You'll need to tailor them to your specific essay. These phrases won't plug into every argument essay that you're faced with, but it's good just to have a repertoire of these sorts of phrases that you can pull from should you need them. Now, I have included a copy of the essay that was written last video, but I just wanted to show you how these sorts of phrases can be just clicked into the essay or popped into the essay as they're needed. So I'm just not sure what's going on here. Okay, so this essay starts with, in many parts of the world, gender often influences university enrollment trends for specific disciplines. So in many parts of the world, we could have switched that to just today, comma, today, gender often influences university enrollment, or in many places, it's just kind of a general background phrase. Now, the detailed background sentence reads, young women tend to engage arts programs while young men are more likely to study science. So the question kind of gave us a bit of a dichotomy. So we had what women do versus what men do. And phrases like tend to, and then whatever, while something, and then, are more likely to. So I'm just trying to show you the structure that you could use to sort of talk about both of these things without losing control of the grammar. Now, the thesis, I argue the reasons for this are largely cultural. Now, this phrase in here, I argue the reasons for this are largely, that's kind of a stock sort of thesis opener that you could pop into many essays. And finally, the outline sentence, this essay will provide evidence in support of this position. Now, if we move to the first supporting paragraph, we see, firstly, it must be recognized that, and then the idea for this first supporting paragraph, for example, and I go even more specific in this sentence, so let's read through it all. For example, in more conservative parts of Canada, comma, scientific programs that act as the precursor to jobs in forestry, and then comma, such as geographical sciences, comma, are often dominated by men. So you can see that I'm including a very specific example of what I'm talking about here, and I frame that with commas. Okay, so there's a comma here, and then there's another comma here, and I start that little blurb with such as. Okay, so it's just kind of like popping in an even more specific example, or a more tangible example, just to kind of bring the whole idea to life. Now, in the next couple of sentences, I'm leading the reader towards a logical conclusion. So this is because people mistakenly assume women are unable to handle the physical demands of the forestry profession. This assumption is difficult to support when one considers. Okay, again, this is a phrase that you could pop into maybe another essay when you need to disprove an idea. And again, I'm using the comma such as down here. Similarly, comma, societies everywhere often assume that science degrees lead more directly to employment, which organizations like Statistics Canada have proven is untrue. Now, I've highlighted the word everywhere because sometimes when you need to talk about something in general, for example, I'm talking about societies sort of generally, it can help your language flow a little bit if you stick everywhere after it. So I might say, it could be societies, or it could be cultures everywhere, or governments everywhere. So I mean, I'm just stating very very clearly to the reader that I'm not just sort of talking about any one specific government. I'm talking generally about governments or societies or cultures that could exist on any part of the planet. And then we carry on. Because many societies still feel the nuclear family is the optimal familial arrangement, young men are pushed towards science degrees to secure the family's future. So here I am starting my sentence with because, which is an error if you are using it as in an independent clause. But this, with the comma at the end, this is a dependent clause that connects to the next independent clause. So young men are pushed towards it. So when you use it like this, because, and then your independent clause, and then comma, it's grammatically correct. Okay, and it's a nice way to sort of lead your reader towards your conclusion as well. So just be sure to use your comma and to make sure that it's a dependent clause, otherwise it will be grammatically incorrect. And then finally, thus. Flawed societal expectations are clearly to blame for much of the gender imbalances seen in university programs today. Okay, and then a few more phrases. So I use this to kind of connect the next paragraph back to the ideas in the previous paragraph. For example is used again down here, and this shows why an unbiased university environment should be defended. So again, leading the reader to a logical conclusion based upon the examples and discussion I've brought up before. Now we get into the conclusion paragraph. So as the above essay explains, comma, so again, a stock phrase that you could pop into most different kinds of essays. Cultural influence is primarily the reason behind why young women go into arts programs and young men into science. And countering this will improve societies everywhere. Okay, so if, again, I'm just restating my my position here with the whole countering this. So again, a phrase that you might be able to use in one of your essays as well. The more you practice openers like these, the more accurate you're going to be when you go to write your own essays. So it's just a matter of practice as you kind of get a feel for what these different sentence openers do. You'll be able to more effectively implement them in your own writing. So I hope that tutorial was helpful, and we'll see you next video.